Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Vlogcast with SeptumSin. And I've got special guests. Well, Jake isn't necessarily a special guest. He's a special co-host.
He's your partner in crime.
But
I'm special.
But we also have Forrest, who's here to help us out for this unique discussion. And we're going to have some others hopefully joining us in a bit. They're running behind, but we can definitely start it out. We're talking about this phenomenon that's been going on for a little while now called Chris Chan. She, of course, likes herself to be known as Christine Chandler. And normally I wouldn't say names like that online, but she pretty much ousted almost all of her personal data a long time ago. Nothing I could say probably isn't already known by many on the web. But this one has gained a lot of infamy. It was brought to my attention a few years ago by Dane. And I kind of started watching it, and then I had to stop because it just got too dark for me. And then I picked it up, and there's like this 50-some part docu-series that was created about this person. And they're also not that far from me. Matter of fact, the place that Chris frequently wishes that she could have gone back to live is not far from where I've been.
And actually where my parents live.
Yeah, it's just, that is just kind of creepy on those levels. And Charlottesville I'm very familiar with. So when I watch a lot of this stuff, I actually see this. But the reason why I set this for this date was because on the 16th, I believe, was supposed to be Chris's court date, which got continued. But if you know where we're at, where she's at, there's a reason for that. It would not surprise me if we go years with her stuck in jail before this court proceeding is done. It's just how it rolls. The justice system here is very rusty. The wheels don't turn very quick. And the charges right now are an incestuous relationship with her mother, which that is quite the stuff there.
I would say that's like 75 levels of disturbing.
Well, and the most disturbing part of all is there's a part of me that says, but did she though? Because this case has so many crazy twists and turns that what's real and what's not is really difficult, especially with the level of trolling going on, because this series really does show you not just an individual that is kind of awkward and kind of a descent almost into madness, but how nasty the internet can really be. At many levels. So why don't I just go into talk with each of you individually briefly. Jake, you have the least amount of experience with the Chris Chan docuseries.
Right.
Have you heard of this person before?
Dane tried to turn me on to this several months ago. He sent me some stuff. I kind of halfway engaged in a conversation, but honestly, I didn't really think much on it at the time, and then forgot all about it until you started talking about this discussion. And I watched the first 2 parts of the docuseries, and yeah.
So what are your thoughts on Chris as an individual? Would you have, if you had actually known about Chris's channel in those early days, would you have been there to tune in? Would you be a Sonic 2 fan?
Well, first of all, I am nowhere, and this is probably not, it's probably a strange thing to say from someone who's doing a YouTube program regularly. but I'm not that big a YouTuber. I really am not. I look at best of lists. I look at music videos. I'll watch vintage clips of SNL. That I've got a few people I subscribe to, but most of the people I subscribe to, I'll watch a video here and there. It's not a regular part of my day, and watching someone this type of video that apparently Christian or Christine or whatever, I don't even think I've gotten to the part I think I got to the part in the docuseries where they had a MySpace page up, and I really, in the days of MySpace, I was doing even less of this kind of stuff.
You don't get into the 30s or 40s parts until you actually do a transition from a he to a she.
Right.
So, yeah.
But basically, I'll be honest, I don't have a freaking clue what the content of their YouTubing is about or web stuff. I'm sure a lot of it has some of the themes brought up earlier, the Sonic 2 and all that kind of stuff. And now on that, I was interested in one. I found it interesting that the person doing that series kept talking about the content that this individual was creating and all this kind of stuff. And I'm sitting here thinking, we've had some discussions about how original it is when you have people like, say, Kevin Smith or Quentin Tarantino who have a really good sense of synthesizing pop culture and creating new characters that you've seen before. You know what I mean? Like they breathe pop culture and put it back out in a way that's new and not new at the same time. This is just a straight up mashup. There's very, very, very little originality that I saw in Sonic 2 and that sort of thing.
Oh, so going.
Yeah, so I was just sitting there thinking, this is a lawsuit waiting to happen. But on the other hand, I kind of appreciate that someone has the nerve to do that, to put that much effort, that much of their person, that much of their time and effort into these characters that, again, that must be a lawsuit waiting to happen. And it kind of gives me hope for my own synthesized characters that might see the light of day one day. So it was interesting. It also reminded me of other people that I know of who fancy themselves artists and are not that great at it. Or at least not as great as they fancy themselves to be. I did think it was interesting overall, and I do have some familiarity with people on the spectrum, and I have some empathy and some sympathy for that, and I do like how they own that. They own it. They're very upfront about, hey, I'm high functioning autistic, and more power to them for that. But yeah, it was an interesting. I could not see sitting there and watching 50 plus of these videos, though. Oh man, no!
I have watched more Chris Chan than I would ever imagine myself.
I was telling you that 8 hours of that Into Search of Darkness was excessive, and you say there's another 4 hours coming on that one.
Hey, that one is awesome, and I didn't feel disgusted or anything during the In Search of Darkness. I can't say that about this though.
I think if we broken those up into small bits, because admittedly these videos are 40 minutes long. I mean, it's not as bad as 4 hour chunks, but
so Forrest, how were you introduced to Chris Chan, and what did you think of this one initially?
All right, so I actually was introduced to Chris Chan by one of my one of my buddies over at Trauma, John Salecchia. He had mentioned Chris Chan, whom I had never, up until and this was just a month ago. Like they had mentioned what happened with Chris Chan. He had mentioned what happened to Chris Chan. I'm like, who the hell is that? So I did a Google search on this person and just started going down that rabbit hole. It was just, and I'm just like trying to read like articles, just trying to find out, get as much info as I could on her. I don't know if I ever mentioned it to you guys, but I myself am a high functioning. I'm on the spectrum myself, a high functioning. Well, up until recently, I would have said Asperger's, but Asperger himself was a Nazi, so we don't use that anymore. I'm high functioning autistic on the spectrum. I don't know where and people like Chris Chan make me concerned about about public perception about people on the spectrum.
That's a bad showing, really. I actually consider, and when I think about it, I actually even consider Rain Man a really negative perception that people would have as an introduction to autism spectrum, which is which is sadly what most people were. That's how I was introduced to it. It was.
I would say. I have never seen Rain Man, but I will say, as far as negative portrayals of people with people on the spectrum, there was a movie that came out. I think it was last year or 2 years ago. No, it was 2 years ago. Called The Night Clerk with. It was what was his name? Not Ansel Elgort. I get the two of them confused all the time.
The Night Clerk.
Ty Sheridan. It was Ty Sheridan and Alex Thomas.
So Forrest, would you have? Sorry, go ahead. Of course.
Oh, were we going to ask Brandon?
Oh, I was just going to ask you if if you had known about Chris's channel early on, would that have been one you'd been into? Would you be like a Sonichu fan?
I don't know. I feel like I'd be in the same. I'm with YouTube in general. I'm largely in the same boat as Jake, where I don't really follow YouTube. I really don't follow career YouTubers. Maybe a handful of them, and even then, I don't watch all their videos. As far as people who are primarily YouTubers, you guys, I follow you guys. I follow Roseanne, the angry video game nerd, and Rosanna Pansino. But otherwise, I pretty much just use YouTube for Jake was watching old SNL sketches, music videos. I'll use it to go look up old toy commercials from my childhood.
Right.
You use it as a repository of pre-existing content.
Exactly.
I admit I've fallen down the YouTube rabbit hole a long time ago, and
but I should mention that I've been on this rabbit hole for the last month. I'm about, want to say maybe 13 or 14 episodes into that YouTube series.
It gets dark.
The Gina Samuel, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
sorry,
after I've
I
Sorry.
had to wrap something up.
Hey, I'm just glad that we have you on. We're going to try and, as I say, we're going to try and keep this as a compartmentalized discussion. So we'll shoot for an hour. We'll shoot for no later than 10, I guess, on East Coast time. I think everybody here is on the East Coast for once.
Yeah.
That's amazing. We're on the same time zone. Yay!
Yay!
If Mo joins us, then that'll flip
It's over.
Threw it out the window.
It's those damn Milwaukee and Oregon people that fuck everything up.
We're gonna leave the dark side out for the moment. We're gonna get to that, but I do want just basic first impressions, and as actually your perfect timing, Dane. How were you first introduced to Chris Chan, and what were your basic first impressions of who they were?
Oh boy. Well, sorry I'm late. I would have liked to have popped in the beginning, but anyway. Yeah, so I have followed quite a lot of YouTube stars and just been plugged into a lot of YouTube drama, more so than I necessarily thought I would. I have followed numerous people like AVGN, like Nostalgia Critic, and all the awesome personalities and the resulting fallout and that kind of stuff. Like, Chris Stuckman, a lot of people, John, people that roll in those circles. And then I stumbled upon a really great series called Down the Rabbit Hole, which gave a significantly condensed version of the Chris Chan story, which was like maybe 20 something minutes long, which was a good introduction to Chris Chan because the Geno Samuel documentary series, which is kind of the polar opposite of that. That's longer than most documentary series in film and television because it's so comprehensive. But that one that Down the Rabbit Hole did was a great introduction to Chris Chan. But I stumbled upon Chris Chan quite by accident, and upon doing so, it was so strange, but even strange, which, and there are plenty of strange people in the world. But what was stranger was just the fact that so many people documenting everything that Chris does. And that then I figured out just how comprehensive that whole community is. And then, of course, the Geno Samuel Christian comprehensive history. I started watching that, and then the rest of history. I was down that rabbit hole, not related to the series Down the Rabbit Hole. I was down that rabbit hole from that point on. What kept me going with the Chris Chan legend is the fact that, well, it came to me at a weird time in my life because I had just been diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum myself, very very slightly, like nothing like Chris per se, but enough to where as I was trying to find my way, I was like, well, I don't want to be like this person. And in
Yeah.
fact, I'd say the Chris Chan legend is the ultimate cautionary tale, no matter where you are in your life, if autistic or not, uh, all that stuff, because it's like, just basically do everything opposite of what Chris Chan does, and you'll probably be okay. For the most part, there with a few exceptions here and there. Some of the stuff that Chris has done hasn't been all bad, but like for the most part, it has been. But yeah, I think it's more that the story just gets stranger and stranger as you go down. But it's also that to a certain extent, there are some aspects of the Chris Chan story that I could relate to. I know that
Mhm.
I took some of those initial feelings when I was younger, or some of those initial experiences, and hopefully went off in different directions. That was always the goal, and I've certainly tried to do even more upon learning about the choices that Chris made versus the ones that I would make. Um, but if anything, I think if you study the story of Chris Chan in the correct way, it can be kind of oddly inspirational in a weird way, but also it's the ultimate cautionary tale. So, if you're the kind of person that looks at extreme people and you're like, okay, there's an example of what not to do,
Mhm.
or if I apply myself in ways that the person did not, then I should be okay. My life isn't bad. Um, and I just like extreme people and extreme stories. I love serial killer documentaries. I love learning about the rises of whatever infamous person or the dictator of this and that, because they're extreme people, and you can learn a lot from people that are extreme because most people are thankfully not
Mhm.
extreme. And so again, if you just avoid what they do, you follow what people you admire what they do, then that gives you more of a leg up. So, but yeah, Christian's story is just so endlessly fascinating because it's one of those things that's so strange that it has to be true, and obviously we have mountains and mountains and mountains of evidence to show that it is true.
Yes.
But it's one of those things that it's like, it's so strange that you couldn't possibly make it up no matter how hard you tried. Just goes to show that indeed, the truth is fiction. But the fact that we have so much evidence on Chris for having done the things that Chris has done, it just helps us to know that Chris indeed is a real person and is not Bigfoot and is not, the Loch Ness monster. Because if it were not for those mountains of evidence, you would have sworn that Chris was some internet urban legend or some character.
Too close for comfort.
I know.
Yeah.
Again, it's like this person is so endlessly strange that you're like, well, okay, I guess there must be God, because there's no way that a person this bizarre could exist just by chance. This person has to have been part of some grand design, whether for our ultimate enlightenment or for our ultimate doom. I don't know.
So, Dane, same question for you as I've asked everybody else. If you had caught Chris when she was first going on with Sonichu, would you be like a Sonichu fan? Would you be a Chris Chan follower?
That's a good question, because by the time I was first learning about Chris, a lot of the infamy had already happened. It's a good question. So I really started to get into a lot of YouTube personalities around 2011. So by that time, so just for a little history. So keep in mind that the real rise to fame of people like the Angry Video Game Nerd, Nostalgia Critic, Channel Awesome People, the big rise to fame of those people was actually around the same time of like 2008, 2009, and from then on. So it's like I think that had I gotten into those people a little earlier than when I did, I think that I probably would have at least.
Oh, you still there with us, Dane?
Yep.
Oh. Well,
can you hear me?
I guess. Okay, now I can.
Can you hear me?
Really, really awesome.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, sorry, my neighbor dropped something off.
Oh, that's understandable.
Anyway, something I forgot, but anyway, yeah, I think I might have gotten at least a passing awareness of Christian. I wouldn't have called myself necessarily a fan, just because it's so poorly drawn and so badly written and so like increasingly disturbing in a lot of ways.
It got really dark there too.
Oh, yes. I know. Well, but it's but at the same time, it's a little bit like you are getting inside of a person's mind and all the kind of ugly part, So there is I'm not saying there's not socially redeeming value in it. It's just not of the kind that Chris necessarily intended. It's a little bit like you look at like you listen to like Charles Manson recordings, and you look at like
G.G. Allen,
Hitler's paintings, or like the John Wayne Gacy's paintings and stuff like that. It's a little, there's some insight to be gained into the psychology of these absolutely bizarre, strange, insane people.
So one of the things I will say it's interesting for me, and it's what brought me back to it after I had to stop after I think I got to the first 20 parts. And I think it was right after the Blue Spike saga that I was just like, I can't do this anymore. But I did come back, especially after I heard about the charges going on, because to me, this story is one of the best nature versus nurture arguments, because a lot of people could say that a lot of what Chris became was just inevitable because she was just that person. But then there are a lot of other people who could say that the environment is what shaped the person into who they are today. And by that environment, I mean the trolling. In reality, there are two things that really shape the Chris Chan experience. One is Chris's actions themselves, and the other is the actions of the trolls.
And Chris's parents, we don't forget them. I mean, because let's not forget that. Well, I think it's a couple things. So you have some behavior of Chris that manifested during Chris's childhood, with with the like supposedly having the first word be monkey, and then taking a long time to speak, and some early temper tantrums and stuff like that. None of which are necessarily unheard of when it comes to people on the autism spectrum. But then you have parents who are elderly, which again kind of contributes to. Well, it contributes to the fact that someone like that. So it's basically, the older your parents are, the more likely some kind of developmental problem will take place of some kind. And so there's that, but then also you've got a time and a place where people who are neurodivergent, or whatever the term is, they're not necessarily going to get the care that they need. Plus, Chris's parents were always very litigious, very confrontational with local authorities and that kind of stuff, and they lived in a very closed off environment. So I think it's one of those things where some of those initial behaviors are not exactly uncommon for someone on the autism spectrum, but the actions of Barbara and Bob, didn't help anything. Plus, I don't think the local Greene County school system helped anything. The world was not a friendly place for people like that at the time, regardless of if they were as bad off as Chris has been. But I think, yeah, you're right. It is kind of a nature versus nurture thing, but it also, I do think that Barbara and Bob have to be held to account in several ways, because they did enable Chris for a long time, in a way that they perhaps shouldn't have. And
right.
I think that Bob and Barbara both were very egotistical, very this is them type people. So it's no wonder why Chris grew up with that kind of mentality. Because when you live in a world where you're the talented, bright, beautiful soul that no one else understands, and everyone else is out to hurt you and stuff, then it does kind of unfairly boost one's ego, because Chris has always suffered from some egotism and lack of self-awareness, which that's one of the funnier things about the whole story, is that especially in the early days, there were some flashes of self-awareness that Chris would have, where Chris would admit to looking kind of stupid, or some of that. So there was a point where Chris was self-aware enough to know that that her situation was not ideal, but that went away over time. I think for me, the saddest part of the whole Chris Chan story is that you see someone whose prospects in life admittedly were not all that great, just given Chris's
mental condition
when it yeah, exactly. And hindrances of other kinds, even besides that, because Chris doesn't really have the best personality either. But you see someone who didn't come into life with the best hand to play, and then increasingly gets the doors slammed in her face to the point, and again by her own actions and by the actions of others, and it's to the point where when you don't see a way out, then you retreat into the world of not just fantasy but delusion, and that's where you get into like the dimensional merge stuff and all that kind of stuff. And it's that to me is probably the saddest thing, because it's not like Chris always had a hard time distinguishing fantasy from reality, but
Yeah.
also you see someone that clearly has just given up on life because life has largely given on Chris, um, and eventually it comes to the point where it was Jeffrey Dahmer's dad who at one point said to Jeffrey, the doors are closing, and that's when he put Jeffrey into the armed services for a brief point where he was also directionless and that kind of stuff, and that further contributed to Jeffrey's own mental decline. Um, and but it's like at this point, it's like when that many doors close on a person, and their psyche is already fragile, then it's no wonder why they embrace strange and bizarre things, strange ideas. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's quite the story, and it's not over, um, but it's reached a new plateau to where it's not really games anymore, which is not to I'll say this: the period that was somewhat fun in games, and I say somewhat because really there was a lot of emotional abuse behind that trolling, as we know. But the where it was kind of sort of fun in games, or you could have argued that there was a lot of darkness to it. But nowadays it's kind of we're beyond the pale at this point.
Well, sorry about that. I kind of
during the
dropped
no
out.
worries. I
What
held it
got
down.
covered? Did we go into the sagas, so to speak?
Not yet. I mean, so we're kind of talking about the differences between the periods where it was kind of sort of fun in games with those early sagas, and then there comes a point where things just kind of go beyond the pale.
I mean, there are three types of trolls, really, and again, simplifying things. Everything is nuanced. There are the trolls that are just kind of basic trolls. I call them, just there to make fun.
Yeah.
There are the trolls that feel like it's their mission to try and help. And then there are the trolls that are malicious and downright evil individuals.
Yeah.
They're the enablers.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
I mean,
the White Knights or whatever.
and those are kind of in between that and fans and so on. And I don't doubt that Chris Chan had their fans. I mean, a lot of people say, well, how can that be? But it's like, no, people can be fans of a lot of things and a lot of people. And it would not surprise me if they didn't.
I mean, look at all the fan bases for serial killers.
Well, yeah, well.
Oh, no. I mean, Richard Ramirez got married when he was behind bars. So, I mean, that's the thing. Like, people can fans of all kinds of strange people and things, and I mean, I would say that Chris's quote unquote fan base, at least in the early days, was pretty much all trolls of the more or less innocent variety. Eventually, it grew to people who were just kind of like, going to a geek show or something. People that are just, it's like you can't look away from the train wreck. And then it's kind of weird because in the latter half of Chris's life, you got people that I think were more unapologetic Chris fans or Sonichu fans. Which is odd because, again, it did not start off that way. It was all people that were just like, you don't want to stare, but you can't look away.
Well,
just making fun.
So I know.
That's the weird thing.
Interesting.
I mean, Chris Chan had a lot of weird. There are a lot of things that were inconsistent. I mean, you had a lot of the creepiness, especially around women, But there were a lot of people that, like, if she would meet them at cons and stuff like that, usually found Chris to be pleasant and mostly engageable, which is especially during the later part when she came out as trans, which she ended up being. So now there's two groups of people who don't necessarily want to be represented by Chris, but at the same time, you could tell that was something that was repressed for a long time.
Yeah, well, the autism spectrum crowd, they don't. One of my favorite things is that people, when they say that Chris is the black face of autism, which I think is kind of funny.
Okay, that I've never heard.
Oh, that's it. Oh, that's all over the place. People have said that Chris is the black face of autism.
They see though.
Again, I still think it's just funny.
That's a poor analogy, though, because Chris definitely is on the spectrum, whereas those people in blackface are not.
You're right, but what they mean by that, when people say that, what they mean by that is if you were to use Chris as an example of an autistic person,
that'd be
a kid.
Yeah,
exactly. That's why they say that. But you're right; it's not a perfect analogy, but when you say it like I just did, it makes more sense as to why people would say that. But yes, there are people that would say that, and then I've heard conflicting things with the trans part of it. I've heard people that are saying, "Oh, Chris isn't really trans," or "Chris doesn't understand what that means," or people that are like, "Well, that's what Chris chooses to call herself. So we need to respect that." At first I was kind of grappling with the former. I was like, just because again with Chris, it's not a simple 1-to-1 of like, because what Chris understands things to be is not the way that even another autistic person would, let alone someone not on the spectrum. But then I've kind of resigned to the latter, which is, well, regardless of whether I personally think that this person understands what exactly goes into identifying as trans, it's like, well, to be respectful to just trans people in general and to respect the decision of this person to identify that way. It's like, well, it's just a good habit to adopt. And besides, it's like, who can really say whether someone fully does or doesn't understand anything, let alone something that they feel inside, which is entirely subjective.
I think Chris is legitimately trans just because, if you look at the docuseries, when Chris was at her happiest, it was after she had fully come out and she had gotten with the My Little Pony crowd. You could tell that there was something positive about her that you didn't see in the past. A lot of the terrible things that she had going around, a lot of that was unfortunately influenced by her parents, who were very homophobic, very like right-wing, nasty side, and
very
that's
stereotypical rural Southern people.
But that's the thing, and that's all you know or understand, especially when you're kind of isolated from others. You don't really have a lot of friends. I mean, and that understanding has some limits. I can understand why some of those points of views and things came out. I mean, as time went on, you notice that a lot of those behaviors went away because slowly realized, okay, that's not appropriate, that's not right. It just took a lot longer.
I'm with you I'm with you because I do wonder to a certain degree if Chris does fully understand what that means, insofar as I wonder if Chris fully understands much of anything. But I'm with you in the sense that I do think that Chris is legitimately trans, because if you look back even at the earliest days, there were a lot of sentiments that were expressed privately that Chris felt like she was born the wrong gender, and that the whole like protestations of "I am straight" like constantly.
Mhm.
The only people
Oh, yeah.
that do that are people that are having to convince themselves. And but again, you notice that with Bob increasingly out of the picture up to the point of actual death, that Chris's kind of guardrails of sorts were
I hit
taken
it.
away. Hello to Mrs. SeptumSin.
Hey,
But
Kim.
Hmm.
but you notice that the rails started to go away, that Chris's true self started to come out. Um, and I agree. One of the few bright spots in Chris' story is when Chris is accepted by the LGBTQ community, and especially with like I believe it was a drag club, correct? Or a
Oh
drag
yeah, she
night
liked to
at
frequent
a
that drag queen club, and again, that was you
yeah,
could
well,
see that she was lit up, and she could see that she was amongst her people there, really, and truly, or she felt
yeah,
she was. She felt she belonged for once, and like I
yeah,
said, not all of that individual. I mean, nobody's black and white. Nobody is all good or all bad,
no.
and I think the same goes for this individual. I wanted to
And I did at that point in the story, I did feel happy for Chris for getting a momentary bit of respite, for because for the most part in that story, the story had been so full of isolation and so full of just retreats into one's own mind and that kind of stuff. But I do know that drag shows and that crowd tends to be among some of the most accepting people that there are, just by their very nature. And so it's nice that there was somebody at some point that was able to, for the moment, embrace Chris for who she was. And I guess you could say the same with like the My Little Pony crowd and that kind of stuff. Um, but it's just I do think that again, I can't begrudge Chris that part of it because everybody feels like a weirdo when they're not among their
yeah.
people, and I can certainly relate to that part in my own fashion.
So I had a question. First off, Forrest, did you get as far as Asperchew?
I don't think I got it. I don't know. I don't think I made it up to Asper Chew.
Okay, I was just now this one thing I was just curious about because it was one thing, and I'm not going to dwell on this particular troll that much. I don't want to dwell on
I
any of the
don't I
trolls all
don't
that much.
Yeah.
I
I
don't like
thought,
Asperchew as much.
well, see, to me, I thought I did not. First off, I thought Asperchew was actually not just making fun of Chris, but actually making fun of individuals with autism spectrum, in
Yeah,
my opinion. I really felt like that person was, but that's the way that most of the trolling started, was grow up, get a job, only babies play with toys,
yeah,
or keep this. It's terrible things that they would say.
Mm-hmm.
And Chris's issue was not the fact that they were trolling, but that she would engage the trolls, which is what brought more and more of them to that, because nothing makes a troll happier than somebody that engages with them. Because you had others like Liquid Chris that were more kind of in and out of the kind of more enjoying flustering Chris to even trying to help an occasion. But then you've
yeah.
got the others like, say, Blue Spike, which is probably the most infamous of all the trolls, that did some terrible things that even a lot of
Blue
the
Spike
other
would
trolls
be
are.
Blue Spike would be great as like a torturer, like an
Yeah.
interrogator in like a dictatorship, or hanging out with Marquis de Sade or something like that, because that whole chapter is one of the hardest to read about in the whole saga because it is so sadistic in the classical sense.
Yeah. To me, that's the
I
darkest
will
part of that
defend
entire thing.
it's up there, that's for sure. Well, as far as the trolls are concerned, not like
Yes.
necessarily just stuff that Chris does on her own.
Well, not necessarily
But
Chris, but just the trolling. Yes.
yeah, well, but I will kind of defend Liquid Chris insofar as I think Liquid Chris is a genuinely talented impressionist and impersonator, and someone that, yeah, is it necessarily right to do it to someone like Chris? Not necessarily, but at the same time, I don't really think that in the grand pantheon of trolls, I thought Liquid Chris was more just trying to have fun with it, and yeah, at Chris's expense, but it was relatively harmless in comparison, and and it also just the fact that Liquid Chris was just genuinely talented as an impressionist, and as like I think Sacha Baron Cohen would be proud of his abilities, to imitate and to kind of get someone to, I don't know. It's just as far or sorry, Andy Kaufman is who I was thinking of. Very Andy Kaufman-esque in a way.
Actually, it's kind of odd because it's one of the few of the trolls that I see kind of evolve as time has gone on. As somebody at first that was just in it to screw with Chris, but then later on, the messing took up on almost a help. Well, I think that there was some supposed good intentions behind it, but I still feel like there was nothing good about it at the end of the day.
Anything you ever, anytime you ever talk about good in the story, you have to grade it on a curve.
I don't know if there are any.
If it's Chris or other people, you have to grade it on a curve because, like we've said before, there are no good guys in the Chris Chan story. There are only different levels of villainy.
Yeah, it's just like who's the biggest villain, and the ones that So out of all of this,
just like Tiger King.
If we were to include Chris in the whole thing, who do you think is the true villain of the Chris Chan series? Would it be Chris? Would it be some of the trolls? Who would it be, really?
I think. Well, honestly, I'll say it like this. My money would go on Chris herself for the simple reason that without Chris being who Chris is, none of the other people come together into that one place. Chris is like the sun, and all the other people in Chris's life are like the heavenly bodies that orbit Chris. Really, the planets, the comets, the asteroids. But really think about it. If Chris was any different,
I would say more.
If Chris,
I would say a more depth analogy would be a pile of shit with everybody else being flies coming to it.
Interesting way of looking at it.
I tried to take the high road there, Forrest. But you know what I mean, right? It's like if Chris was not the way that Chris is, all these other people would have found something else to do, or they wouldn't exist the way that they do, etc. But even if they, for some reason, if it wasn't that particular group of people, it would have been someone else. It would have been some other group of people.
Oh, yeah, they had found somebody else.
Their own stories, their own peculiar ways of interacting with this person. But it all begins and it all ends with Chris. And even if those people did not exist, Chris kind of is Chris's own worst enemy.
Yeah, I mean, you see that. You see that with trolling channels like Leafy is here is a good example of one that was a terrible thing. But Leafy, of course, like to just basically, okay, these people look dumb. I'm going to make fun of the dumb-looking people, and of course, they gained a massive audience for that, which is a sad thing.
But then, like, let's say with Chris, for example, if Chris never got on the internet in any way, Chris would have inevitably ended up in some similar predicaments, at least if we're talking legally, because even prior to having that strong of an internet presence, before people even knew who Chris was, Chris got into legal trouble with like getting thrown out of Target and
kicked out of school,
the campus, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
A
exactly.
lot of
So
that.
it was gonna come even if the internet wasn't a thing. It just the internet made it so much worse, as the internet does.
So I'm gonna go around because, of course, I want to try and keep this to the hour. So I want to touch on the current events. I guess it is. Of course, like I said, the trial was continued, which I do feel bad because Chris is in jail for the entire time. So no matter how it turns out, they're stuck in jail. And I've seen plenty in that county where they get time served because they're stuck in jail so long. But looking at this, and I looked, poured over some of the information surrounding it and surrounding the allegations, and some of the stuff is a little bit fishy. Not saying that Chris is innocent of the whole thing, but as watching the documentary, I've had reason to not be 100% sure if I believe everything on face value, or even when Chris claimed it, to whether it was even true or not, just because it would not surprise me if there might be somebody holding an account hostage and saying, you're going to say this online or your account's going to be erased or something. It's been done before.
Yeah.
So the question I wanted to pose to you all, and just to open it up, from what you've seen so far and know about this individual, what would be your percentage that you feel like the charges are 100% true? What would be the percentage you feel like they are like dead on the money? Forrest, what do you think?
Percentage? I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, Chris claim. I mean, there's claims that Chris committed incest, but I don't know. At this point, I would say maybe somewhere between 70 to 80%.
Okay. It's still fairly high on there. How about you, Dane? What would you say the likelihood is that 100% of what's presented is true?
Like the probability of whether Chris actually committed incest, I would say, okay, so whether Chris committed incest on Chris's own volition versus being put up to it, I could really believe either one. I could, because Chris has been compelled into saying and doing some things that are not in Chris's best interests, or I mean, Chris has not really been honest, but that's mostly been through like self-protection and through kind of making herself look better. I think as far as Chris usually doesn't lie about things that are that incriminating. Usually anytime there's been anything that incriminating, Chris did it 100%. So that to me, there wouldn't necessarily be that much of a reason to just lie like that, so blasé on the recording. But I mean, yeah, has Chris been put under duress to do certain things? Absolutely. But usually when Chris has been under duress, it's been painfully obvious. I mean, like you look at the whole like, okay, that whole thing with like holding Optimus Prime and not wearing the medallion and all that stuff. It's like so obvious that this person is in distress. But like I heard the recording and Chris sounded pretty just matter of fact about it.
The other thing is,
I think that well, hell on my percentages. I think my money right now is on at least 80% that Chris did it of own volition. Maybe there was some maybe there was some, cause it's a little bit like the O.J. Simpson case. It's like, did OJ do it? The likelihood is so strong that it's like it's kind of not even a matter of debate at this point. But were the LAPD, were their hands clean? No, they weren't. So it's like there aren't really any any true heroes in this scenario. So I really think that, yeah, there might have been manipulation, there might have been coercion, but I think Chris is more than capable of doing that kind of stuff on her own.
See, I'm at about 50-50. I think it's capable,
Really?
but I have my reasons for looking at it. See, I look at this case as a fascinating case study as far as mental health is concerned, because you see paranoia, you see psychosis in a lot of way, delusional thought process. Oh, most of that latter actually triggered by those trolls over the years, because it does damage to a psyche, but also manipulation. Because there are two types of manipulation, and you covered the one quite well. But the other type are those who are posing as his friends or as potential lovers, and those people have gotten Chris to say and do things that sound legit from the heart just because Chris wants to get with them. So it would not surprise me if that person had. It would even have gotten them to say, like, it would make me really hot if you were to say this. So let's talk about that. And Chris would do it. And again, that's the thing. Yeah, I think that there is a shot that it happened. But again, now without trolling involved, no, not a chance. There's a 0% chance that trolling was not involved in that whole deal. But how much, it's hard to say. It's
here's a little thing I'll throw in there. So I think trolls are involved in some capacities. Trolls are it's sad that trolls are some of Chris's most loyal friends, quote unquote, if you want to think of it that way. But it's like, who else has stuck around with Chris for a long period of time? So there's that, but then also think about it like this. I have a theory that, again, I think Chris did do it, but I think Chris probably thought that she was, like, quote unquote, helping her mom, by doing this to try to, make the pain go away, or try to make her, save her from the brink of mental, decline and stuff like that. Because Chris's solutions to things have tended to be very out of left field, shall we say. And very much you remember the whole recycling thing, need I say more? There's just strange solutions to non-existent problems. And so in this case, it's like, I have a feeling that Chris probably thought that she was helping her mom by doing this. I mean, and a lot of abusers of various sorts, they tend to think that in those terms.
Well, of course, it's really hard to cover all that there is of Chris Chan in an hour. But I did want to, with wrapping up, I did want to go to each of y'all and talk about a favorite favorite being kind of a relative term.
I would say the
thing that stands out to you about the Chris Chan sagas, parts of it, and just any final thoughts. I'll actually go first on this one because I wanted to put forward the autism awareness video that Chris made in Little Big Planet, which I'm sure she'd be very sad that they are shutting down their servers while she's in jail. But it's kind of a interesting thing, an illustration of that individual where it starts out really good and then goes someplace that it really shouldn't. And I think that really embodies the person as a whole.
That's kind of the Chris Chan story in a nutshell.
Jake, did you have anything to say as far as like a favorite section or something that actually did show you interest in the Chris Chan discussion?
I'm not really sure there's anything particularly I could cite. Nothing really leaps to mind.
I think Jake's just horrified.
Jake's like, I'm done with this. No more.
Well, no. I mean, I am always fascinated by things that take place close to home. So maybe that was one thing. Like, because so much of it took place near here, hear about the the reference to Regency Square Mall. I was like, oh well, I know that place. There was that, but yeah,
Hey, there's something there. You could have gone to that game place. Shoot,
Maybe.
Rocky could have gone to the game place while Chris was frequenting it.
And I will admit, the thought crossed my mind of how many people did we both know. It's like, I don't know.
I'd have to check. I need to check with them to see, because they lived in Charlottesville for a while, as to whether they knew much about this individual. So how about, actually, Dana, I will let you end us. So we'll go to Forrest next. What would you say your most memorable part of the Chris Chan saga is so far?
From what I've heard of it so far, there was like I forget which episode it was, but I think there was at one point some of these trolls were leading Chris to believe that she was going to go on a date with Vanessa Hudgens, and I'm thinking, like, you know what, Vanessa Hudgens is sexy, but yeah, right. If she's like, you're actually gonna win a date with her, like. Maybe in some it's like really. I mean, I wish, but maybe in some alternate reality. That's and she fell for it.
Like Megan Fox.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, Megan Fox was another name they mentioned.
Well, but Chris got her mixed up with Megan Fox, which I thought was funny. But Chris apparently has trouble with recognizing faces or having
that's a tick of
part of what the
autism.
Yeah, well, and that explains why the Sonic Blue Arms thing was such a sticking point.
Like, I'll admit,
because Chris thought that Six Blue Arms made it.
Actually, one of our people on there, Embryo Arts, actually has met Chris Chan.
Oh, really?
So I just ask, so what was your experience in meeting her? What were your impressions of her? I'll just wait to see if she responds. And
Chris Chan's a fucking hole.
It's funny. In watching the Chris Chan documentary, I have often kind of wondered if I were to meet up with Chris myself, if our paths were to somehow cross, like what would I even say or do, or, because it's one of those things, it's like I probably would want a picture just for the sake of saying, hey, I was next to this person, but I probably wouldn't want to keep it, I wouldn't want to get into that gravitational field, because people have gotten into that gravitational field for an extended period of time. They haven't really come back unscathed.
I mean, like I say, from what I've heard on the con scene, she was usually pretty pleasant. I mean, I haven't talked to.
I'm not saying that that's not true. I'm just saying.
And again, a lot of people, sometimes it's better when you know them on the surface, but if you try to get too deep with them, it then gets weird.
Yeah, exactly. Or like the, do you remember the Michael Jackson tapes, the Rabbi Shmuley book, which was written based on his therapy sessions with him and all that stuff? Eventually, Michael stopped taking a lot of his advice and was getting more into drugs, and eventually Rabbi Shmuley, like, if I'd have kept up our relationship, I would have gone down with him.
Well, I mean, and again, that's pretty cool. I mean, I don't know what it is, but if you actually see somebody that especially when there's something famous or even infamous about the individual, it still was a cool experience to actually have said that you've been able to have met or seen. Yeah. So, and there's a part of me.
Well, I mean, I don't. Go ahead.
I mean, there's a part of me that wishes I could have met her for myself to make my own judgments instead of what is presented. And I'm not even sure how impartial the documentary is. I think it's as impartial as the person can make it. But again, I try to give people as much of the benefit as a doubt as I can, though it's really hard at that at that level. But who here would have been interested to have actually
again-
met Chris?
I would have liked to in some form, but again, in such a way that I could have left with my sanity / dignity intact, you know. But just as far as like meeting, I mean, heck, I wouldn't mind actually. I'm the kind of person that I would probably like.
And I've actually seen a couple of YouTube videos with Chris as a kind of a guest star on, and it's kind of fun. Like there was one about like a YouTuber who's doing
I
a
wouldn't
haunted
mind
house
meeting.
with her. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Like, so I'm the you know, honestly,
Oh,
you know, like I've often thought about like if I could interview a notorious person from that kind of stuff. I actually would love to do that. Just
yeah. I think that if I really do think that if you could find somebody who she felt was genuine, you could get a good interview out of them. I mean, she even later on, and you see people were interviewing. She had her guard up a big time, but it's no wonder. I mean, if I had all that stuff going on to me, I would be paranoid as hell. I mean, it's got to be a nightmare to go through life and everybody you talk to, you just don't know if they really are who they say they're going to be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's bad enough these days, but that's just a terrible thing. But with that being said, we could keep talking all night about this case and not still scratch the surface. Lord knows I have buried myself in enough of it. But did anybody have anything that they wanted to say as a final word on this subject before we wrap up? Well, all right. Well, with that being said, I thank you all for coming in and talking to us about this interesting subject. And I'm sure that more of that documentary will come out. Oh, go ahead, Dane. Sorry.
Might I be able to? Sorry, my mic seems to be cutting in and out. I was going to say, I think maybe Mo might have gotten in there. Maybe Mo might have gotten in there earlier, but I think I was the first one in the group to really take the deep dive into the Chris Chan legend, and I was the one who kind of put it in front of everybody before the latest charges came out. So you know, I have to give myself a little credit there. Because it is just so strange. But yeah, as far as the Chris Chan legend, I keep saying that because it is so strange that it's like you would have sworn it was made up or it was really, you know, it was like a few, you know, how like some people have said that, you know, oh, Jesus is like a fusion of different myths and people from history and stuff like that. People who think that that's what they say. But like it's almost like if enough time went by, you could have sworn that Chris was maybe something like that. But again, we've got these. We know more about Chris than we know about, you know, George Washington or Shakespeare or any of these other like shakers in history, which is pretty sad to think about. That we know more about. We know more about Chris Chan than we know about Shakespeare. Just think about that.
One of the historic figures for the history books.
Well, really, I mean, well, Chris is quote unquote the most documented person in human history, or so they say, and it's like, yeah, that has to count for something. And you know, but as far as we talked about moments and stuff, I think for me it comes down to a couple things. I think as far as like notorious and disturbing moments, I think what we're going through right now probably takes the cake. With the incest stuff, I mean, I don't know how much you top that. In terms of like harm inflicted upon Chris, I think the blue spike thing takes the cake in that realm. I think in terms of like happy moments, you got the drag club that we mentioned. In terms of kind of oddly prophetic / you know, strangely insightful moments, you got the autism tutorial video. I think as far as just pure humor, I have to give it up to this does not deserve a captain's log introduction because this is dead serious. People of the internet, my mother and my father are angry at me. They're blaming at me. It's my fault. I admit it. I want everything about my house off the internet. I'll send in detectives. I'll send in police. I'll send in everything in my power. And he does like the Sailor Moon poses at the same time, which is really funny. But in terms of just pure humor, that moment always makes me laugh.
Well, thank you all again for joining us on this little discussion tonight. I'm sure this is a rabbit hole we may try to run down a little bit again as court develops and as the case develops. I'll be curious to see it as it wraps up. Maybe at the end of the court case, we can come back and do another talk to see where we stand. Because I'm sure that out of all things in life, I'm sure that this court case will be documented as well. You know, there's some trolls that are sneaking in with hidden cameras, recording every word of what's going on.
Well, somebody said it best. I forget who it was. Somebody said that they genuinely hope that this case goes to trial because what they want to have happen is they want to have someone in court reading out all the stories of the trolls and all the weird quotes, all the this and that, and it has to go down in Virginia legal history forever and ever. And they're like, I want it to. I forget who said it, but it was like, I want it to be the OJ of the internet, you know. And it's like the thing is, I could totally imagine that happening. Yeah, really. I could totally imagine that happening, but I kind of want to see that too, just for the simple reason that lawyers will have to actually recount all this stuff, and who knows, maybe they might even call in witnesses, and it's like, it really will be like the third act of like a John Waters movie or like a musical or something, you know, where all the characters come back for the final reprise, you know, or like the trial in Pink Floyd's The Wall or something like that. You know, it's like it's got such a climactic feel to it, and you know, but it's like just the thought of them having to read all this stuff out in court, and it exists on the legal docket of Virginia forever. I'm like, oh, the heavenly God, the gods above have blessed us.
Well, with that being said, I think we've learned one lesson at the end. Don't feed the trolls.
Yep.
Good night, everyone.